Welcome back, everyone, to Flight of the Firebirds. I'm your host, Amelia, and I'm really lucky to have really special guest with me today for today's episode, where we'll be diving into the wonderful world of literature with three incredible authors who are also a part of our Royal English department here at Kellenberg. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Okay, I'll start. My name is Mrs. Vaughn, and I teach junior and senior English this year. And I don't know if you'd like me to start with the book, but I went to Scotland in 2019 and visited Urquhart Castle. And on the placard in front of the dungeon was the story of the most famous prisoner there. So it was very intriguing. And when I came back home to New York, I started to research the life of this prisoner and started to write during COVID. And the next thing you knew, I had notebooks and notebooks of pages, and then didn't know what to do with it. And started to, check on the internet what happens next. And then fortunately, in October 2023, my book was published. It's called In Silence Cries the Heart, and it's based on a true story.
Wow, amazing.
I am Mr. Flood. I teach 12th grade English and college writing. I've been teaching at Kellenberg for 25 years. I published a memoir in 2019. It is called Where Are You? Finding Myself in My Greatest Loss. It is a story about the loss and hope.
Wow, I love it.
Hi, my name is Mr. Brown. This is my 27th year at Kellenberg as a teacher of English, sophomore English, and a seniors in college writing, and I'm been a track coach here and cross-country coach for 27 years. In 2018, I published a book, Chocolate Dreams, which is based on an amalgam of people I came across in life. And recently, this past November, this book, No Borders for Truth, has been published, and I think it's going to do very well.
Wow, so it's very exciting to have a new book. Why don't you tell me a little bit about the newest book?
Okay, so the motivation was my oldest son was in the State Department, and he was in Afghanistan and Herat, which is old classic Afghan city, 60 miles from the Iranian border, and he was tasked to coordinate Iranians who wanted to seek freedom with the aid of the United States. And he would come home and he have these great stories, and once or twice a year, and he'd tell me these stories, and I knew nothing about Iran other than we had this adversarial relationship with them. And so the hostage, I think, like most Americans, there was this really pejorative memory of Iran and the United States, and there had been a great relationship with Iran and the United States up until the CIA in 1953 and MI6 Britain overthrew the democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. And so, because of my son's stories, it whetted my appetite to read about this whole Iranian and the United States thing. And I think I've read 36 or 37 books to date on basically Iranian and American relationships. There's a lot out there. And but I've learned a lot, and the point of the novel is to show the commonalities, because in the world community, I think we're looked as adversaries, and we have so much. And I've been fortunate to meet so many interesting interview Iranian expatriates and stuff, and find out how much we have in common.
Mm-hmm.
And rather than continue on, this whole thing about Mossadegh was one of our greatest mistakes. We're the greatest country in the world, but we have made terrible mistakes. And taking him down for all the things I've read, all the research, all the people I've talked. He was this eccentric but beloved leader. And as one woman, Iranian woman told me, you had your Abraham Lincoln, we had our Mossadegh. And this came to light when I'll never forget, and it's my opening line of the novel. In 2018, my wife and I went to Montreal, in the summer, and we went into a taxi, and the fellow had a Persian name, taxi cab driver, and I said, "Are you from Iran?" And he said, "Yes." And I said, "Oh, I just finished a lot of research on Mossadegh." And he turned around. We were almost in an accent. He turned around. He goes, "Mossadegh was gorgeous." And that's my opening line. I used it in a different way, but that's the opening line of the book.
That's really interesting to be able to share like your son's especially unique stories. I think is a really, it's a really great way to do something like that. And what really interested me about your book, Ms. Vaughn, was that it came out of COVID. You mentioned you got a lot of writing done because I can imagine we're all doing, whatever to pass the time, but something so special came out of, moments like that is really cool. So
yeah, that's true. I mean, most of us, I know I was going crazy over not teaching or teaching from my kitchen. And that interaction was driving me nuts. And, no matter how many bells and whistles you try to make the class go better when you're remote, it's never quite the same. So in terms of just the stimulation, the idea of sitting down after the school day or on a weekend or whatever and just going through the books, the research, the background on cattle reaving, which is basically thievery, like Wild West thievery, only on the border between Scotland and England. It really was vivifying in so many ways to keep the juices flowing, and then not really caring or knowing where it was headed was also kind of wonderful, because at least you felt you were doing something constructive regardless of the outcome.
Yeah, it's very productive,
Yeah.
But storytelling, I feel, can be such a powerful tool, especially like in times like that. Like so I feel like it brings communities together. So like within your memoir, how did you feel that you could you brought communities somewhat together within?
Well, I think that it can be it's ironic almost, because loss has such a way of separating, but I think the original idea for me when I first started, I've always wanted to write. If I would say it was something I knew I would do someday, that is the truth. I just didn't know that I was going to write about this. And my wife and I lost a baby at birth, and that was very sad. To make a long story short, it's the number one reason for divorce. Speaking of separation, right? Is the death of a child, and I think that I never would have imagined that I was going to write about that. Even when it happened, I was like, maybe I could write about this. So is a wound, you want to keep it covered a lot of the times. But I was asked, my wife and I, speaking of community, when we lost the baby, almost immediately we joined a bereavement group of parents who lost a baby, and it was so important to us how everybody shared, and we became friends, and you wouldn't think that something like that could come from something like that, but it did. And the woman who ran the bereavement group was at North Shore LIJ, or I forget the hospital we were at. I forget what hospital the bereavement group worked at. But anyway, the woman who ran the event called me in 2016. This is 8 years after we lost the baby, long past the time we'd had children by then, and 2016, I'm going to say, or 15, and said, hey, I just want to see how things are going. Da, da, da. She said, would you want to speak to at our annual event? And I said, sure. I'm trembling. What should I say? She said, just talk. And so I did, and it was so powerful for me. But so many people came up to me and said, "You should write a book." I said, "Well, I will, but how about this?" And that was in 2015. 2018, I sat down and wrote a draft, and 2019 was published. So even after 2000, this still took me years. I moved very slowly. But yes, so that community. But since then, people that have read the book and how many people have given me feedback or whatever, how many people have said, I lost a baby 35 years ago and never told anybody. And if this can encourage people to tell their own stories, then that's a great triumph for me.
Because in a sense, I can imagine how vulnerable of a thing that is for people to share, and if to give someone a space to be felt seen is a really incredible thing to do. So right off of that, what has been the most rewarding thing from each of you? I want to hear what the most rewarding thing that has come from writing.
Right. Well, I know for me, if you get the attention after the product, that's great. That's sort of the icing on the cake. But I think the tapping into the creative spirit was just so awesome, I thought. And you mentioned something before, Amelia, about the idea of why did you start doing this during COVID, whatever. The concept of reading and writing is the concept of transporting yourself mentally when your physical body is located in a stagnant situation. So it was so rewarding for me to consider myself, quote unquote, a writer when I've been a reader for almost my entire life. Thousands of books. I can't even begin to tell anybody about that. But to be among people like Marty and Mike, it just makes me feel so happy that I even tried to do this. And the feedback later on is fantastic. People that I don't know who've made comments about the story, or they have said, "Oh, we'd like to carry this in such and such a place," then that's awesome too. But I know that it was the creative aspect for me that just was so stimulating, and it made me feel so happy, so happy.
Yeah. But what an accomplishment it is. But
to avoid repeating, I agree with everything. It's true. The feedback is great. I was talking to somebody and they said, "So how did you feel like once you got published?" I said, "I felt great. It was great, but I didn't feel like it was done. I feel like, okay, I want to write another book." And that's really the truth, is that the publishing of the book is a wonderful feeling, but the writing the book is the thrill. And publishing a book, the other thing I'd say, you said what's the greatest, outcome of it? It's humbling. It's deeply humbling. In so many ways. Oprah Winfrey hasn't called me yet, and I'm wondering why. But in other ways, it's, I look at what I've done, and then I look at what other great authors have done, and I say, oh my gosh, there is a reason they're so revered. There's a reason that these men and women who make it their life's work and do what I did once. 30,000 words, my book is short, fast, and it was difficult for me to do. And you look at all these great authors that are writing 80, 90, 100,000 words at a pop and then doing it 10 or 12 times. So it's humbling. You realize how difficult it is. And, you mentioned that you've done a podcast with Mr. Vegas in the marathon. That's humbling. Yes, you're proud of it, but it's humbling. That's hard work. And you realize how, I'm not using this word really, but how weak you are, and yeah, I want to write another book, but my gosh, it's exhausting.
As a human, it helps you connect to a level of understanding. Yeah, it's incredible.
Yes, picking up on what Cathy said on the creative part, and Mike on the thrill of writing. I read once Scott Fitzgerald wrote that if you're not crying, you're not writing. In my first book, there was a couple of parts, a couple of the mother character. I was thinking of my mother and a friend who had passed. I was basing his character in this accident that's depicted in the original novel, Chucknut Dreams. And I was crying. And my poor wife, because she was like the editor, well, Patty, what do you think of this? And okay, and she would give her, on the right day, she would give her feedback or whatever. And then there's a part chapter in here, which is based on a terrible tragedy which happened in Abadan, Iran, and that should have never happened in 1978. Yeah, 78. And I felt, and I personally been fortunate. I've had, friends who died, but something like losing a child, that hasn't hit me. But my children have lost their biological father, and I know, and I have been, understood the stories and known the stories, and I felt that their sense of loss really, it came to life when I was writing that chapter about these people who were burned alive in a theater, the Cinema Rex Theater, and the grief, what the family was going through, because I know, one of my daughters, we don't use the word step, where's my daughter, she had a delayed reaction years later, and I can't believe my wife, what she went through with her. And knowing that and hearing the stories of that, it put me in that space that I personally, fortunately, have not totally been in except once in my life. My friend had passed away, but so I was able to really, I think, resurrect that feeling of.
That's probably one of the most difficult things to do in the writing process. Is the advice typically given to a writer is write what you know, but then you don't want to be limited by that. And how do you write about something that you don't know? You've got to be able to include some things at some point that you don't know. To write a memoir is one thing. I knew everything because it happened to me. But once you get into fiction, there's going to be characters in there or events in there that aren't yours. So how do you know them? And I think that's part of the writing process, is either researching or thinking or drafting, and where this doesn't work, this does work, running it by other people, because it is your job as a writer sometimes to write about something that you don't exactly know, but that it is somehow your job to do. Shakespeare wrote about a lot of things that he didn't know at all about. But you have to be able to capture it somehow.
A woman, I think Emily Rubin was the name, writer for the New York Times, she said a writer should write about things he or she does not know. And that sort of resonated. Yeah, well, I know.
But when you're approaching those difficult topics and, things that can be touchy, like, how do you approach writing about them? Like, things that, not everyone would feel comfortable, you have to talk lightly about them. How do you approach,
I think if you write honestly, you're usually in good shape. And I don't even know if that, I don't know if you understand what that means, and I don't even know if I understand what it means, but write it faithfully, write it truthfully, include it only because it needs to be included. So for example, if you're going to write about something, it's got to be relevant to the story. Avoid things that are gratuitous, anything like that, I think. So if you say this is important to the story and you write it honestly, I think that usually you can navigate some potholes of propriety, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because especially with topics that you were talking about, I feel like it can be difficult to try and share stories like that and experiences. So it's just, how did you go about putting them into your story?
How did I go about outside of the research? Well, that's the creative part. That's
right.
Really, and I have to say, I can't write during the school year. These two, I think, are much more balanced in terms of that. Cathy's writing and still managing the English department and grading her essays. I cannot. I wrote. It took me 6 years to write, 6 summers over 6 years to write, because like I have the teaching and coaching, and maybe I can't balance as well as they can, but I, like in the summer, I can focus in. I can read more. I always read more in the summer, and now I can write. Like I can't even think of something. I have ideas, but I can't even think of starting it until school is over, because that's what I'm focused.
No, I totally understand that, and I get that, and I find it's a real struggle sometimes to tap into that imagination and creativity when you have the daily chores in front of you that don't go away. Somebody's got to make the dinner, somebody's got to do this, somebody's got to grade those essays or whatever. So I wish I were a superhuman and could, plan the time for the writing in addition to the stuff for school. But I usually spend like the Saturday when there's nothing going on. I don't have a big family, and my son is older now, so there's not as much pressure on me to be at places or to do things. And I use a lot of the vacation time that we have, like over the winter break or over the Christmas break, and just throw myself into it. But to be honest with you, when you lose that thread, when you lose that train of thought, you have to go back and immerse yourself in the world again of the book. So like right now I'm writing about pre-Norman conquest. And when we had a couple of days off for Thanksgiving, and instead of doing any writing, I spent the whole weekend just re-immersing myself in what I had written. And then it was Sunday night and I didn't write a lick. But it was just one of those things where you're so detached from the daily grind that you do have to almost enter into a secondary world in order to, or at least I do. And I'm thinking that many writers do. So you have your little space. I have a little space in my house on the porch. In the morning, I like to write early in the mornings when the sun is coming through the porch, and there's very few distractions at that point. And that's when I'm doing most of the creative stuff. Later on in the day, if I revisit it, it's usually for editing or transferring it from handwritten pages to, the computer. But, that imaginative world is not always at your fingertips. And there's lots of times where I'm trying to go there and I can't get there. And I'm just like, okay, this is a day you can't do it.
It's such a discipline. And when I said before, you get humbled by the people that do this full time, or these great writers, the discipline, my gosh. The other day, I don't know what I was thinking of. I was thinking of something that, if I was going to add something, and in my mind I was like, oh, that'll be good. And I'm working the words around my head, and writers do that, right? And so I'm like I said, okay, yep, that's good. And in my mind, I'm just thinking of what I'm going to say, what I'm going to write. And I got home and I'm going to do this and do this. And I said, I got to go write this down. I can't wait. I got to write it down. But I did wait, and I didn't write it down. And then after the kids get to bed that night, it's almost 10 o'clock. I sit down at the computer. It's gone. I don't remember what it was.
Discipline is so discipline. It's just the 2 summers with the original book. The setting was in the Pacific Northwest, and the major setting. And I went out there for 1 week at a time, 2 summers. And when I went out there, I started doing everything like I was on vacation, hiking, swimming in the Puget Sound, and I'm like, and my wife said, well, how much you been writing? And I'd been calling her, and I'm researching, but I wasn't. And finally, I knuckled down. Where I ended up going back to my college library, and there is a beautiful view of the Bellingham Bay, it's called. But I stopped looking at that, and I knuckled down and started writing drafts and everything. But you got it.
But you know what though, that writers have a tendency to beat themselves up, and I in that particular scenario, Marty, it's like you were researching, you were living. How do you know, and this is for real, how do you know that at some point you're not going to have to write something about the Puget Sound, and you say, oh yeah, that was that day I went swimming, and this is what it looked like, this is what it felt like. And when you are a writer, I think that is part of it, writing is life, and so while you're not actively note-taking or researching, anything that you might see, If you're an observant person, which I think most writers are, it enters somewhere and it might come out later, you know. The discipline is to sit and write and train yourself to do that. But my grandmother, God rest her soul, a hilarious and brilliant woman, but many, many, many years ago, she knew I wanted to write, and I was writing, you know, and she said, have you written anything lately? And she said, are you writing? And I was talking to her in her house. She's elderly, 90-something years old, and she said, are you writing anything? And I said, no, not really. You know, she said, well, are you thinking about it? I said, yeah, all the time. She's like, well, that's part of it. And it's true. That's part of it, you know? So you do have to get the discipline of getting everything onto a page, but writers are always thinking, you know?
Living, yeah. It's the experience. That's a really cool way of looking at it.
And I don't think you should be afraid of silence. I think that's where a lot of the seeds are germinated, in the silence. So when you're hiking or you're swimming, like, you're just in your own mind at that point, and you're allowing all the distractions of the regular world to sort of melt away. And that's when you may not even consciously think that you're formulating your thoughts for your books, but so much happens in the silence, and that's what we've lost so much of in our society. There's always noise. Done with. You tune it down. And
I tell you, the biggest killer to the writer's process, people might not like this, and I'm only partly serious, but staring at the phone is like if you want to write, put the phone down, you know?
Yeah. I haven't realized how attached everyone is to it, but like recently there's just like, it's come up. It's like, we cannot do anything
without it.
Yeah. So I feel like that's really like, I mean, even when I have to do things, I can't seem to do them just because there's so much other things to distract us. So I feel like when you're trying to get in the state.
How often do you pick up your phone to do something and then find out you've done 5 or 6 things on your phone other than the thing you picked up the phone to do?
Exactly. There's too many distractions, and you know, when you're trying to.
It's been enabled by checking for our subs assignments or whatever.
We're gonna have to cut that.
Oh, but yeah, the constant distraction really takes away from those, you know, beauty in the silence moments that we find. But I have one last question, and it is a little bit niche. It's what advice would you give to students at Kellenberg specifically if they're interested in pursuing writing, whether it's as a career or as a hobby or anything of the nature?
I'll go first because I just want to let them know that they should just be open. Just be a sponge. And instead of having the imposter syndrome, which we all suffer from time to time, just know that you can find stories in anything. I never went on that trip to Scotland with the idea that I was going to write a book. Not at all. But I remember thinking to myself while I was standing there at the castle, looking at the dungeon, and just saying, wow, this would be a great story. And never like putting 2 and 2 together until I came home and I thought, well, I just want to read more about this person. And I just want to read more about their relationship and stuff. But I would suggest to all of our students that, number 1, don't discount your ability and think that you're being an imposter. Number 2, just be open to anything, because stories rest in so many different places. I remember listening to a podcast of the author of Before We Were Yours, I think it was, and she was ironing. And they had one of those crime shows on, and it was about the Tennessee Children's Home that I hadn't heard of and she hadn't heard of, whatever. And she's watching the television show, ironing her clothes, and she's thinking, wow, that would be a great story. And P.S. becomes a bestseller or whatever. So I would say those 2 things. Don't worry about being an imposter at all. Your voice is going to be your voice no matter what, and be proud of it, whatever degree you're at, whatever, level you're at, and be open. Stories can grab you anywhere at any time.
Yeah, don't go looking for them because they'll find you, right?
Yeah. Well, the Cathy said that the stories are here; they're everywhere, and here at Kellenberg, there's such a reservoir of the people, of the myriad of kids, of talents and interest and everything.
Yeah.
Quick story: I coached a girl here at Kellenberg, Erica Waleski, and I'm talking to her mother at one of our track meets, and I said, "Oh, I'm researching my for this book I'm writing, blah blah blah." Told her this is the first book, and I'm going to go to back to Washington State, and she says, oh, I have a cousin, Mario. He lives in Vancouver if you're going up that way. I said, well, I am. And she says, contact him. He's a big wig in real estate up there. Make a long story short, I thought, people ask me something, I'm going to follow up with it. And so I said, can I get that number? Called up Mario. Mario was a big wig in the city of Vancouver. He takes me all over, and he said, I want you to meet my protagonist was a hockey player in the first novel. He says, I want you to meet my barber. And I was like, my barber? His barber? What's this about? We go to this barbershop, and really fancy barbershop, and it was a woman owner and 2 woman owners, actually. And apparently she was known as the hockey mother of British Columbia. And her son, Nick Payton, played for the Winnipeg Jets, and her other son played for Michigan State. They won an NCAA hockey championship, whatever. And he wanted me to read a passage to her, and that was important to me. I because I'm not a hockey guy, but it's more than hockey. But the protagonist, I wanted to make sure the hockey part was right, and so I was reading to her, and the woman, her partner, was cutting hair, and she stopped and she says, "You Americans finally understand the passion. Our boys come from the prairies and the ice to get in your HL." And I knew I had something. I knew I got what I wanted, the passion of the hockey player. That was just, happened. That was by chance.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's important too. So, I know there are a lot of students in here that have a way with words and are writers. There are so many things in front of us that are pushing them away from that as a career. And I say, oh, look, you got to pay the bills. So, you need a viable career. And being a creative writer is not necessarily one of those ways, right? However, The Martian, there's a movie, but there was a book before that. The guy's some kind of a scientist or whatever he is.
Yeah.
And he started, like, he was blogging. He was just typing chapters of a book, and he had like a email list, and people were reading it in email, or he was posting on his website, whatever it was. This is years ago, obviously, but people read it, and then more people read it, and then a publisher read it, and they said, you got a book here, and then it becomes a bestseller, and then it's a movie, and he's a scientist, So it doesn't matter what you do for a living. Lots of lawyers, lots of doctors become writers too, So the storyteller is a relentless force. You'll tell a story, but don't. If you're a storyteller, let it go. You let it, build it. Let it happen. Don't fight it entirely. You know what I mean? So yeah.
Yeah, the storyteller takes many forms, pretty much. Yeah. As we're nearing the end, we do have a little tradition at the end of everything. I want to do a quick rapid fire for you guys. So
Great.
I'm going to throw some quick questions at you. Yeah, so are you guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Starting with you, Mr. Flood. Hardcover or paperback?
Paperback, definitely 100%.
What is your favorite book genre, Miss Vaughn?
All historical fiction. Yep.
Easy. And Mr. Brown, what is the best book to movie adaptation?
Oh, the best book to movie adaptation. Well, I have to say on the top of it, because we're about to teach it coming up in a few weeks, The Great Gatsby, and I still say the original
70s.
Beef on the 70s with Robert Redford. Was Mia Farrow?
Yep.
Yeah, it was a good movie. Baz Luhrmann's his movie, but not book to movie story.
Yeah. What is one book that you could read over and over and over again?
I don't read books more than once. The only book, once or twice. Okay. As a teacher, I've read some books 25 times. The only book I'll say that I have read multiple times and will read multiple times is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Got 6 different copies. I've read it like several times. I love that book.
I can be a witness to that.
And Miss Vaughn, what is a book you think everybody should read?
Oh, wow. That's a great one. I'm going to go classic here. I think everybody should read The Inferno. Yeah, I think that is the journey that we're all on, recognizing our own flaws, and then that's when the work begins, once we can come face to face with it,
I love that answer. That was good.
Can I get the question that you asked Mike about the
Yes,
book?
yes.
And it's crazy because, especially in the summer, I do read a lot. But there's this book, Ryszard Kapuscinski. He was a Polish journalist turned writer. And he wrote this book, Shah of Shahs. And now, like I said, I read 37 books in Iran, United States alone. But this book, he writes more lyrically than Scott Fitzgerald, my favorite writer, and just poetically about the turbulent times in the 70s, and how he writes and everything. And again, I bring up my wife, poor lady. I'll be reading at night or something. She goes, "What? You pull that out again? Why do you keep reading that?" And I go, I want to write like this guy.
Yeah.
And it's that book is translated from Polish. So imagine what it was like in Polish.
All right. So I just want to say thank you so much, Miss Vaughn, Mr. Flood, Mr. Brown, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
It's been such a privilege to dive deeper into each of your works and hear about the connections between, everything that we hold dear to Kellenberg. And to all the listeners, thank you for tuning in today. We hope you've walked away with some new perspectives. And until next time, I'm Amelia Caban, and this was Flight of the Firebirds.